Welcome into the show. Today we are here with Head of Football Operations, Cody Alexander. Cody, how you doing today, big dog?
Doing great, man.
Awesome. We're joined by Aaron Quinn of the Cover One Buffalo podcast, on to talk some Buffalo free agency and talk about the season as a whole. Excuse me, Aaron, how you doing today, big dog?
Doing great, man. Thanks for having me on today, guys.
Awesome. Appreciate you joining us. I guess we didn't give you a fair warning. I am a Kansas City Chiefs fan.
That's all right.
Obviously, the Buffalo Bills run into them in the playoffs just about every year. But I think, and this kind of leads me into my first question, but Joey Bosa, them signing him to a one-year deal with some incentives folded in there for his deal and everything. Is that a move to say, all right, we're still focusing on Kansas City because we're a 14, 15 win team every year, or at least in that conversation, we're dominating our division? Or is it just we're trying to get better?
Yeah, well, I think it helps Bills fans to see in the highlights that get posted across social media. Some sacks on Patrick Mahomes definitely helps the emotional aspect of Bills fans buying in to that. But I think the Bills have a plan for what they want this team to look like. And I think Brandon Beane hasn't shied away from, like, you do have to beat Kansas City, and everybody's trying to do that, right, in the AFC right now. So, yeah, it is centered towards beating a team like that, but you can't focus on Kansas City and forget about your division. So there's still a lot, like, you have to win your division every single year. You still have to build a good team. So it's a fine line between building the team the way that you see fit to consistently win your division, but also attacking that top team that seems to always be in your way no matter what you do.
Do you think that this is actually more about stopping the run in a nickel defense than it necessarily is about Bosa's sack production? Because if you look at it, that's actually one of the things is kind of fallen off, but he's an upgrade from Epinesa, and his run defense actually the past couple of years has been really, really good, which is something that has been kind of a complaint, kind of universal complaint of the Bills, especially if you're going to base in that nickel. So you now have Bosa and you now have Rousseau, who are both very good against the run.
Yeah, I think that's huge, right? They don't want to get out of nickel. Teams have tried, and some teams have had success in running against them in that smaller line. You also saw it with the addition of Ogunjobi here at 300 pounds. So you've seen, Bosa 6'5", 280, Hoyt coming in at 6'4", playing at like 270, something like that. So these bigger pieces that allow you to still stay in nickel but be better against the run. I agree with you there. And I think it's really the improvement of giving you a little bit more than we were getting from Von Miller. Von Miller was still super productive in those pass rush snaps, right? I think fans didn't love necessarily, he didn't hit home in big moments, but he was still a very productive pass rusher. I think he was still actually a pretty good run defender, but they didn't allow him to play in those run defense snaps. So he was only getting like 20% of the snaps. I think Bosa will have a higher percentage of the snaps and be able to be a little bit more flexible in that run scheme.
Yeah.
Right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think Buffalo's defense, Sean McDermott being a defensive mind and Bobby Babich coming in this year, it was a very interesting defense early on. But then towards the end of the season, you had the Rams game, the Lions game, and then allowing 32 to the Chiefs, which nobody does anymore. So I do like the additions that they're making to their nickel defense, like what we're talking about here, defending the run while staying in a secondary heavy look.
Yeah. Well, and they actually did a pretty good job. Those Lions games, the Rams game, it was one of those weird ones where they shifted mid-game to stop the run. And that was kind of the problem, is if they were going to stay in nickel, they had to get to some single high looks. And then that left them vulnerable to a pass game. We saw what Matt Stafford did once they switched to those single high looks. So they ideally want to play in two high shell safety looks. And in order to stop the run and get a little bit bigger in that front seven, they had to switch to some single high looks. And I think that left them vulnerable. I think that's sort of what we're seeing this offseason is we want to stay in too high. And so what do we have to do that? We have to adjust this front seven so that we can be a little bit bigger and we don't have to change the identity of who we want to be. Because when they are playing their best, it is those two high structures. It's the types of zones that we see them run. And so I think they had to play a little bit out of identity to stop some things that teams were doing to them at the end of the year last year. And I don't think that was a comfortable place for Sean McDermott and Babich to live in.
No, you could totally tell that they were having to run cover 3 way more. I mean, you go look at their 5-year trends. This year will stick out of where it was a complete shift to more of a cover 3 base than what we've seen with McDermott. Really, McDermott's been a 2-high guy for a very long time. And so this makes sense to me. These moves are kind of telling you the story of how this offseason is going to go.
Yeah. We've talked about Greg Rousseau a couple of times. He had a really good year, top 10 defensive end when it comes to havoc. What is it, 83.6 I'm looking at here. Is he going to be the guy moving forward, obviously with a 4-year extension, but is he one of those elite pass rushers? Like, I mean, obviously these metrics prove it, but is he that guy that Bills Mafia is looking at and really hoping for on third down, on fourth down, even in today's NFL? So is Greg Rousseau that guy that they're looking at primarily?
I hope so. I love the deal of getting him done early here. I think that's a very team-friendly deal for the Bills. He's still super young. I think sometimes people forget how raw he was coming into the NFL, and he was part of that COVID year draft where he sort of missed a year in that COVID run, but he was like a tight end and a wide receiver before transitioning to defensive end. So there's a lot of development still for Greg Rousseau. And we heard the way Von Miller talked about him of already being at that elite talent level. To me, it's just a matter of putting it together consistently. I think that there was gaps in the production for him, especially on the pass rush side. And I love that you guys have Havoc because it's something I use all the time. I think we look at sacks primarily and just judge how productive a player is based on sacks. And there's so much that goes into that. We saw in that Broncos game, Greg Rousseau setting the edge and being a run defender that stops and sets you into those 3rd and long situations. He does so much more than the pass rush. But at the same time, that is sort of what fans need to see is somebody that is consistently getting into those double-digit sacks. So I think there's a little more meat on the bone here for him, but he's a young player developing the right way. And then again, to talk about all these things that they've added, I think that's only going to assist him in being able to not have to deal with all of the burden of being that guy that is the guy on this defensive side of the ball. But the length, like that size, length, those traits, it's hard to come by in the NFL and with that age. So it makes a lot of sense to lock him up for the next 4 years and hope that he can hit the ceiling that you expect him to get to.
Always pay early as somebody that lives in Dallas. Always pay early. Always pay early.
Yeah, I think it's a weird thing right now because I think if you poll Bills fans right now, they haven't done enough this offseason. And I don't think that's true, especially when you look at the paid early. You got Greg Rousseau, Terrell Bernard, Khalil Shakir. You locked up Josh Allen with that big deal. Those are the types of moves that prevent you from having to go and reach in free agency in the next year. The best teams in the league aren't going crazy in this first wave of free agency. And so it's usually a good sign if your GM's not signing mega crazy deals first wave here of free agency, your roster's probably in pretty good shape.
Yeah. I think that's really the interesting part. We can talk about. I talked about the Chiefs earlier this week on a radio show, but in a similar way, where they don't really have the free agency flexibility in the cap, but they also have. They can't really draft guys because nobody's really making this roster. I mean, it's the same thing with the Bills too. But switching sides of the ball, going to Josh Allen, reigning MVP. Some people think he may not deserve it, but he deserves every dime on his contract in the eyes of Bills Mafia. Getting him $330 million, resetting the market. What are we missing from Josh Allen? I guess is the one thing that we're asking. I guess it's just beating Kansas City, but that's a tall task that only Tom Brady, Joe Burrow, and the Eagles know how to do.
Yeah, I don't feel like we're missing anything. I think he proved this last year that he can do more with less. This is the stability that you need. Buffalo lacked stability for decades. This is the only thing I think that the owner has done right. He also owns our hockey team, and they're not very good either. And so this just makes sense I say it all the time, kind of half jokingly, that Josh Allen's the most valuable asset in all of Western New York. And it's not just the play on the field. It's the being in national commercials. When you're a small city like Buffalo, the type of attention that we've gotten since Josh Allen's been here, the primetime games, the games of the week, the being in AFC championship games here 2 times now. Yes, ultimate success hasn't come to Buffalo yet. Maybe one of the best dynasties of all time has just happened to get in your way. This is probably exactly what teams like the Knicks felt like during the Jordan era, where you had these great teams and you just couldn't get over the hump. But even in the, I'm originally from New England and was a Bills fan there. And even during Tom Brady and the Patriots' run of dominance through the AFC in those years, Ben Roethlisberger still snuck through. He got one. Peyton Manning got his. So I think there's hope that you've got that guy that whatever year it is that Patrick Mahomes doesn't get there, somebody else is going to sneak in and have the chance. And I think that every year you've got this guy, you are one of the teams that's going to have a chance. It's you, Cincinnati, Baltimore Ravens. There's some other teams up and coming, but they haven't proved they can be those ones yet. And so having Josh Allen locked up, it's not going to happen every year. There's, progress isn't linear. So I could see them not, having an earlier exit next year maybe than they did this year, but it's not going to be his last AFC championship game. And I do think at some point he'll get them over the hump.
Right. And we talked about like him winning the MVP, doing less with more, locking in Shakir, or I'm sorry, I forgot the name of the guy going from the Rams.
Palmer.
There we go.
Yep.
But it is kind of interesting to see what different teams, teams with elite quarterbacks that have already paid them, what they're trying to do with receivers. And we see DeAndre Hopkins go to Baltimore. We see the Bills go and get Amari Cooper in the middle of the season. So what type of moves other than extending a Khalil Shakir do you see the Bills making in the rest of free agency and the draft?
Yeah, the offensive side of the ball feels really solid to me. You have your offensive line locked up, which I think is the number one most important thing. We saw for years them have a below average line in the league, and Josh can do some stuff with that, but it's much nicer when he has it. And I think that led to the success of this whole Mina Kimes likes to say target agnostic offense for the Bills last year. I think having an offensive line that gives them that protection allows you to have that sort of thing. They still got that all locked up. Khalil Shakir, I think there's a lot more meat on the bone for Khalil Shakir. We saw with Joe Brady finally being able to manufacture him some touches and what he can do yards after the catch. I think there's more for him in terms of pushing the seam. He can go up and get it. He can be that type of guy that attacks the point of attack, and we haven't seen that necessarily level from him. And I think he can stretch, not in the traditional sense that a Palmer can on the outside, but I think he can stretch the interior of the field and give you some of those explosive plays that way. So I love getting him signed up early here because that deal is going to look better and better. Curtis Samuel's another one that I don't know if he can stay healthy, but when healthy, we saw a dynamic addition to this offense and what that can provide for them as well. So that's going to be interesting. And then another one built into what the Bills already have on this roster is Dalton Kincaid, right? Like he had a couple injuries over this last year, and you hate to see, Brandon Beane sort of spoke on this that, guys like Keon Coleman and Dalton Kincaid need to be able to overcome those injuries in season a little bit better. I think that's part of becoming a professional and getting over that. Everybody faces an injury at some point. How do you respond to that? He played through some significant injuries, so the statistics and the production haven't met the draft expectations of where Dalton Kincaid was taken, but I'm expecting a big jump from him this next year. He's kind of a matchup piece nightmare in that same role, like a Gesicki. I think a lot of people thought he was going to be a Kelsey. There was a lot of that surrounding him. That's not who he is, and that's not who the expectation should be. But I think he can match up on a linebacker, get on a safety, and be a matchup piece that forces defensive coordinators to sort of draw some attention there, which opens up a lot of other things. And then you add in now Josh Palmer, which is, I think, kind of the missing element of what they didn't have last year, which we talked about a little offline here, Cody, was that ability to stretch the field. Josh Allen has really struggled in down the field throws, whether it's his inaccuracy on those throws. They're pretty inefficient throws all around the league. I think fans think that, you just throw the deep ball. Once you get over those 20 plus air yards, it's a very inefficient play. But you still have to, when I look at how to defend this Bills team, you can really condense the field against them with the type of wide receivers they had and keep it all in front of you. And that makes it hard to put together 10 play drives and stuff like that and be perfect on all those plays. Now you have a guy, whether or not it hits often, you have a guy that teams have to respect the speed that can take you over the top. And that just opens up for the guys like a Kincaid, like a Shakir, who can do some stuff throughout the seams and in the middle and find holes and zones. You have to respect that speed on the outside, and it was just something they lacked. Matt Collins was probably that guy. We saw him in the Kansas City game, break one deep, but he wasn't a speed guy like that. He was really playing out of role for him there. So I think Palmer, doesn't have the production that Bills fans would like to see to match the contract. He got 3 years, $36 million. But I think you're banking on, this is a young player. He's still 25 years old, and he flashes that ability to stretch the field. Again, whether or not you're getting the targets, teams have to respect that.
Right. Yeah, and I think that he fits what the Bills need.
Yeah.
Whereas with the Chargers needed an outside number one. I think the Bills have that in Keon Coleman. They need somebody like I think of him as almost like a Jameson Williams for the Lions, where we're going to get him deep on these deep shots. He can be a perimeter kind of gadget guy. But then we've got Shakir, who's like St. Brown, who's kind of this intermediate monster. Then now I think that added element of having a big physical receiver outside that's kind of a go ball getter. He's your possession receiver. He can run those digs in the middle of the field. To me, all of this is making sense. If there's a team where I'm looking at, okay, how are they weaving the offseason together to put themselves in a situation where they can win in, January? The Bills, to me, are the one team where it's like, check mark, everything's off. I think we talked about it. Bosa is going to take pressure off of Rousseau. You now have a bigger inside presence, so Oliver doesn't always have to be in on these rundowns. You can now have kind of a bigger guy that can play some of these rundowns. So you have that mix up there. You're keeping your linebackers clean, and then with the receivers, like you mentioned, you now have Knox and Kincaid who can now really play that Y and that F that you need to have in a modern offense, playing more 12 personnel. Your running back situation is good. I mean, As a Broncos fan, I'm looking at this and I'm like, I feel like we're a ascending team. And I'm like, crap, here's the Bills. So even if the Chiefs take a step back, I really feel good about what the Bills did this offseason.
Right.
Yeah, there's still a couple holes to fill. I think they need a real one tech or part of a rotation of 1 tech. And I'm actually looking at Derek Nottie, one of your Kansas City guys there. I would love to get a big body like that as part of a rotation. And with Rasul Douglas, free agent, that cornerback 2 is in question. I would like to see those two things filled up here. And that's a classic. This is how Brandon Beane operates every year. And it's so nice after just years and decades of just mismanagement in the front office. He's just going through and checking off these holes so that they can go into the draft with those 10 picks, move around, find the guys that they want to get, not necessarily have to draft for need. So I expect cornerback 2 to be solidified here in the next couple of days. And I do think they'll get one more big body here at the defensive tackle, because Quan Jones is still under contract, but he has just not been the same guy since that bicep injury, which it's tough for the Bills. They needed that last year. They needed him to step up in a big way. I think you can still use him in a 1-year deal, but you need something else in that rotation. They were just kind of like running in different older 3 techs and playing them out of position. And that, if you're going to stay in nickel with smaller linebackers behind that, you can't have that. Not in the playoffs.
You got to have a space eater. That's for sure.
Right.
I do want you. What are you hearing about Douglas? Because that's an interesting thing to me. I think he fits perfectly into this zone defense. I think he kind of took a little bit of a step back this past year, just because, again, I think he was isolated more, playing more cover 3. I actually, you have not mentioned this yet, but I would like to see a safety at least in the 2nd or 3rd round taken to kind of push. I know you guys just re-signed Hamlin for a year, but that, to me, if there's holes left, I agree with you. Nose, you probably need to figure out what you're going to do with Roswell Douglas, and then obviously adding a safety piece.
Yeah, Douglas was a tough one to watch last year because I think there's plenty of good play left, and the Bills really require your cornerbacks to come up and tackle, and he's a solid tackler. And so that's a big requirement, something they'll be looking for. But he got exposed whenever he got into a situation where it's a crosser across the field. That age started to become a little bit exposed. The lack of speed got a little bit exposed at times. And maybe, to your point, not necessarily a fault of his own, but a fault of what they were forced to do in certain situations. And it stands out when you have Christian Benford on the other side, who is just a top flight. Guy.
Top corner in Havoc, 95. All year long.
Yeah, I was hoping that deal was part of these 4-year deals to get and handed out, because that's gonna, you see that JC Horn deal, and it's only gonna get more and more expensive here.
Trent McDuffie too. I had the same thought.
Yeah.
I hope they still get something done. But on the Rasul Douglas one, I would welcome him back on a 1-year deal in terms of insurance. And still,
I agree.
I'm eyeballing a guy like a Trey Amos in the draft. I would not be mad if they walk away in the first 2 rounds with a top corner to pair with a Christian Benford, because I think that's a huge need for them. There's some other guys. I like Benjamin St. Juste is a really nice fit for the Buffalo Bills in that cornerback 2 role. I know Commanders fans hate him, but I think he fits. He's an aggressive player. He's going to come up and make tackles. That's what the Bills want.
He's a zone corner. He's long, lean, and can run. Yeah, playing in that Commanders, again, talk about a heavy cover 3, heavy cover 1 system, not conducive to that, but that's a name to keep an eye on.
Yeah, so I like that. And I agree with you on the safety. That's probably the area of this defense that I'm the most unsure about right now, because I really like Cole Bishop. He was high on my board. The Bills drafted him a little higher than I expected him to be drafted. Has tons of athleticism, really outside of the archetype that they've had at that safety position, much more of an athlete. He had up and down play last year, some inconsistencies, but he grew as the year went on. Damar Hamlin is a nice floor in insurance for that room as that third safety. And Taylor Rapp, when healthy and playing well, I think is one of the better safeties in the league in terms, especially for the fit for this defense. He hasn't shown the ability to stay healthy consistently, and that's a concern to me. So having the 3 is nice. There's a little bit of insurance there, and having DeMar been in this system, and even going back to the Pitt system, having him play in that system, which is very similar to Sean McDermott's, I think fans don't realize how hard it is for the back half of this defense to learn this system and passing off different things in zone coverage. So you have some of that familiarity, but I do agree it's one of those things where I'm targeting and looking at the draft for some of these safeties, because Cole Bishop's not a guarantee to develop. And I don't know that Taylor Rapp seems like a ticking time bomb of he could get hurt at any point. These concussions can become a problem at any point. And sure, he can hurt somebody else the way he plays at any point. And so I would like a developmental piece to pair with a Cole Bishop as you go forward, because I don't think Taylor Rapp's the one.
Yeah, I mean, you guys basically only have 3 safeties. I mean, I know you guys have Cam Lewis as a free agent, but he's kind of been a practice squad player the entire time.
He's a hybrid game day role, which is nice because he can do a bunch of different things, but he's a master. He's a jack of all trades, master of none, that you don't want to have to see play.
No, 100%.
Absolutely. A lot of the things you were saying, Aaron, earlier about Josh Allen being the most what was the term you use? He's the most valuable asset in Western New York.
Yeah.
Yes.
A lot of the same things can be said about Patrick Mahomes in Kansas City. So I hate having to beat you guys in the playoffs every year. But I mean, it is kind of interesting that those 2 quarterbacks, the 2 best quarterbacks in the NFL, landed in 2 of the smaller towns in the NFL. So and then they meet every year, and so it's pretty impressive that happens.
Yes. And there's unfortunately for us, there's that connection of the Bills were in that weird transition when we traded that pick to Kansas City for Patrick Mahomes. And so that gets held over our head consistently. The Bills weren't going to draft. Yeah, the Bills weren't going to draft a quarterback before their GM was installed. That's not good business. You don't draft a quarterback. I mean, we've seen Chicago Bears do that here for a decade, and it doesn't work out really well for a GM. I don't believe they were in the spot, but it hurts that Kansas City went and got them. But I tell, Bills fans are very annoyed with Kansas City fans all the time online. You should be annoying. If we ever have the type of success that you guys have, I'm going to be insufferable. But these 2 fan bases are actually very similar, right? Years of passionate fan base, didn't have success for a long time, now coming into their own. And granted, we haven't had the success that you guys have had, but that is the premier matchup for the NFL right now, is Kansas City versus Buffalo. I just hope that at some point we can get over the top on you guys, and not just in the regular season here.
Well, it keeps getting closer. That's the thing, is like with the and not to peel back healed scabs, but that last pass hits the tight end in the hands. Like it was right there. And like my heart is palpitating. They're going to tie the game, go to overtime, and take momentum and win. And so that's where my head goes during games. And so it's getting closer, it feels like.
Yes. And one thing, we look at these free agency moves, and any Bills fans out there listening, One thing the Bills definitely aren't doing that I think fans are doing is making all their decisions based on the outcome of a singular game.
Right.
And it stinks to lose that game, and it stinks to do it consistently and lose that game. But that is not the way to build a team. You still have to stick to the plan that you've had the whole time. Football's weird, man. That ball bounces in a weird way. It's a one and done situation in the playoffs. You can't make decisions based off the outcome of that one game as much as it hurts.
Right.
No.
Right. All right, gentlemen, unless you have anything else to add, I'm good. You can visit us at fieldvisionsports.com, download our app, and keep your eyes peeled for what we have coming up very soon. Appreciate you, Aaron, for joining us. Cody, as always. I'm Felix Johnson. This has been the Field Vision Sports Football Podcast.